Unit 11. Gateway. Heritage is concerned with the ways in which very selective material artifacts, mythologies, memories, and traditions become resources for the present. The contents, interpretations, and representations of the resource are selected according to the demands of the present. An imagined past provides resources for a heritage that is to be passed onto an imagined future. It follows, too, that the meanings and functions of memory and tradition are defined in the present. Further, heritage is more concerned with meanings than material artifacts. It is the former that give value, either cultural or financial, to the latter, and explain why they have been selected from the near infinity of the past. In turn, they may later be discarded as the demands of present societies change, or even, as is presently occurring in the former Eastern Europe, when pasts have to be reinvented to reflect new presents. Thus, heritage is as much about forgetting as remembering the past. Exercise 1. Every puddle is a sign that the water has been blocked, stopped from traveling down through the ground. So if a puddle is persistent, then the first thing we can deduce is that the ground beneath the puddle is either non-porous or extremely wet. This is mainly interesting when we travel through a rural area and notice that the number of puddles suddenly increases, despite there not being any more rain in that area. This is a sign that the rocks beneath your feet have probably changed, even if the appearance of the mud has not changed. Since the rocks are responsible for a lot of the characteristics of the soil in an area, and the soil strongly influences the types of plants and animals you will find, a sudden change in the number of puddles without a very local downpour is a sign that the rocks, soil, plants, and animals all around you will also have changed. Exercise 2. Keep in mind that while coaching our children to future success, we can't forget about the present. Understanding how what you are doing today benefits you today and not just somewhere down the road is an essential part of personal motivation. Sometimes seeing the big picture isn't enough. In fact, the big picture can sometimes be overwhelming. For example, when writing the manuscript for this book, I spent many a morning procrastinating because I could only see the big picture. The big picture overwhelmed me. The ability to break a goal down into manageable pieces is important to motivation. When I saw that if I only did some work every day, I would eventually reach my goal of finishing an enormous project, I was motivated to do a little bit every day. I began to enjoy the journey of writing when I saw how writing every day benefited me today, and not just at some time in the future. In that sense, be careful using the big picture as motivation. Exercise 3. Arturo Toscanini had a phenomenal memory as well as a phenomenal ear. Once, he decided to conduct Ernest Schelling's Impressions from an Artist's Life, and he invited Mr. Schelling himself to play solo piano. During rehearsal, Maestro Toscanini, who never looked at a score during rehearsal, although he kept one on the stage, stopped Mr. Schelling and stated that he believed the pianist had omitted a G-flat. Mr. Schelling replied, "You are right. I did omit the G-flat because I never wrote a G-flat at that particular point in my original score." That surprised Maestro Toscanini, so he invited Mr. Schelling to look at the score with him. After looking at the score, it was Mr. Schelling who was surprised, and he said, "Mr. Toscanini, I did omit the G flat. In all the times I have played this piece, I always omitted the G flat. Since the day I wrote it, I had completely forgotten it was there." Exercise 4. By the end of the millennium, emotions had become such a central part of psychology's focus that many scholars viewed emotions as the motivational force guiding almost all of human behavior. Today, many psychological scientists agree that any decision we make, any relationship we pursue, anything we want, all these judgments, behaviors, and desires are influenced by emotion. Even those decisions which we believe are shaped by rationality or logical principles about what is right or good are in fact more often triggered by a gut emotional response. We tell ourselves that such decisions aren't driven by our emotions, and that we are relying on the mind's most sophisticated reasoning processes. But research shows that we are very good at coming up with sophisticated reasons to justify what we want to think, and what we want to think is almost always shaped by how we feel. Exercise 5. Can you tell how a toy is made? While there is certainly room and a need for some manufactured plastic in our lives, we also need to make much more room for simple, natural materials. Does your children's toy selection show an adequate representation of nature? Is there wood, cloth, natural fibers? Not only do these toys feel good to play with and connect children to the outside world, but they are also often strong enough to last a lifetime and even more. I think we should consider our toy materials in the same way that people talk about whole foods. The closer to the original source, the better. Can you picture your toy growing somewhere on the earth? Wooden blocks, felt balls, and cotton dolls are often some of the best toys. Exercise 6. A particular difficulty that attends efforts to determine the extent of cross-cultural convergence in emotional expression is the fact that cultures do not categorize emotions in the same way. Mark Benamou, studying the use of effective terms to describe the expressive character of music among Western and Javanese subjects, ascertained that some Javanese emotion terms did not straightforwardly correspond to Western categories. This raises some doubts about how much we can trust studies that purport to compare cultures. Presumably, we can assume that when Javanese subjects report expressiveness in music using words for which English-speaking subjects have no term, the two groups of subjects are not recognizing the same expressive content. But more generally, we should be alert to the possibility that imperfect translations lead us to imagine greater agreement about musical expression than we would find if we had a more nuanced sense of the way the terms are used in the respective languages. Exercise 7. To know whether an artistic performance succeeds or fails requires that we know what counts as success or failure in any performance context. Music critics will consider a pianist's tone, phrasing, tempo, accuracy, and ability to sustain a line or build to a climax. Speed and brilliance may be important considerations, which is not to say the fastest performance will be the best. But behind these considerations is an unstated assumption that it is one person's 10 unaided fingers that produce the sounds. The excitement a virtuoso pianist generates with a glittering shower of notes is intrinsically connected with this fact. An orally identical experience that is electronically synthesized can never dazzle us in the same way. Sound synthesizers can produce individual notes as fast as you please, while pianists cannot. Built into the thrill of hearing a virtuoso is admiration for what the performance represents as a human achievement. Forgery and other forms of fakery in the arts misrepresent the nature of the performance and so misrepresent achievement. Exercise 8. The story of how milk became America's drink combines the perfection of industry with the perfection of consumer knowledge. For example, Spencer and Blandford attribute the increase in milk drinkage to significant improvements in the quality of milk and cream sold, which led to a more generous use of those products. Consumers drank more milk because they had greater knowledge of the food value of milk, which was the result of favorable teaching and publicity based on important findings and research. In other words, the rise of milk consumption, according to these economic studies, is due to the increasing perfection of milk in both quality and price, and education of consumers about this perfection. The history of milk drinking becomes a history of this increased perfection through increased consumption and through a public-private promotion of the product. Exercise 9. Research suggests that a person's level of self-complexity can have important consequences, particularly when people are confronted with negative events or difficulties in a given life domain. Imagine learning that you did poorly on a midterm exam. If you're someone who is high in self-complexity, that is, you define yourself in terms of many non-overlapping domains, for example, student, avid skier, committed volunteer, enthusiastic fan of Glee. The negativity that results from your poor exam grade is relatively contained, affecting only how you feel about yourself as a student. But if you're low in self-complexity, such that your identity as a student overlaps to a great extent with the few other identities you have, then the negativity associated with your poor exam grade is likely to lower your evaluations of yourself as a student, as well as spill over and affect how you evaluate your other overlapping identities. In short, putting all your self-eggs in one basket can be risky in the face of threatening self-relevant events. Exercise 10. A few years ago, the video store down the road from our house closed and moved downtown. The reason for the move was that another video store had opened downtown and was already operating successfully. Businesses of a particular type tend to gather together in the same part of town. This is not necessarily because those areas have been designated for, say, theaters or law firms. Rather, it is because no one wants their competitors to gain an advantage over them. If you set up your business near a competitor, you avoid losing any advantage that their location gives them. You also give yourself the chance to steal customers away from them. As more theaters cluster together, the area becomes known as the theater district. It is then imperative for new theaters to open in the same area or face a potential loss of patrons. Exercise 11. We all know from experience that some of our dreams seem to be related to daily problems. Some are vague and incoherent, and some are anxiety dreams that occur when we are worried or depressed. But whatever the source of the images in our sleeping brains may be, we need to be cautious about interpreting our own dreams or anyone else's. A recent study of people showed that individuals are biased and self-serving in their dream interpretations, accepting those that fit in with their pre-existing beliefs or needs and rejecting those that do not. For example, they will give more weight to a dream in which God commands them to take a year off to travel the world than one in which God commands them to take a year off to work in a relief camp. Our biased interpretations may tell us more about ourselves than do our actual dreams. Exercise 12. Customers like email because it's easy to use and it gives them immediate access to organizations. Most of the time, customers receive an automated response indicating that their email has been received and stating when they can expect to get a response. However, even automated responses need to be phrased appropriately. Some years ago, a clothing company used to send out an automated reply that read, "While we cannot get back to you personally, we do appreciate your input." That response didn't provide much satisfaction or a feeling of connectivity. Researchers Judy Strauss and Donna Hill, in one of the first major studies covering consumer complaints sent by email, found that less than half, 47% of the firms studied, created higher customer satisfaction with their in-kind email responses. They found that simple things make a difference. This included a fast response, an email that addressed the specific problem, and an email that was signed with a real person's name.